Hello and welcome to Season 6, Episode 4 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And we are, of course, reading James Hitchcock's History of the Catholic Church, moving on with Chapter 3, The Triumph of the Cross, talking about sort of how Christianity came to be accepted in the Roman Empire and sort of the first really official recognition of Christianity as a very dominant religion, taking over a lot of the pagan rituals and things like that, and sort of early church liturgy structure and everything like that. Interesting chapter. Learned a lot. I thought it was great. What about you?
Yes, I agree. we had a brief discussion off the record.
I guess, yeah.
I'm flying out to DC today.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing this a little early,
mm-hmm.
and I am less prepared than I should be. But yeah, I agree. And we're going to keep this brief. It's going to be a rant-free episode.
That is a lie. There are going to be many rants. You always say that. You can never help yourself. It just always happens.
I've never said it'll be rant. I never guarantee to be rant-free.
I think you have. And those are the episodes when you go on the most rants.
All right, I'm gonna. Speaking of guarantees, mm-hmm. I'll go off on this tangent. So yesterday I went to my favorite convenience store, Quick Trip.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a new person there. He wasn't new to Quick Trip, but he was new to that store. And I got my usual iced tea and 3 Tootsie Rolls. And he rang it up and he says, like $3 and something. Mm. I said, I don't know that's right. How'd you ring that up? He says, how much are those Tootsie Rolls? These are little mini Tootsie Rolls. Mm-hmm. 49 cents each. I said, oh, that doesn't sound right. He says 49 cents each. Like he's like getting assertive with me. And I said, they're not 49 cents a piece. And he says, I guarantee you they're 49 cents a piece. The price went up. And I said, okay, I'll just take the tea for $1.50 because I buy it often enough so I know the price with tax. And then he just rings that up. He says, $1.50. Like he realizes this weirdo like knows the price with tax. So I paid my $1.50 and I said, I'll just put those back on the shelf. So I put them back on the shelf and he's like staring at me as I'm walking past the registers again to go back to the car. He's like staring at me. I said, and of course the sign says 19 cents, which is still highway robbery. But I said, it's 19 cents. And he just kind of stares at me. Anyway, it was weird. But he was so immediately hostile. And he says, I guarantee you, that's what his state. I guarantee you it's 49 cents. I think I left that out of the story. So he says 49 cents. I guarantee you they're 49 cents. I said, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's well, you would know. You're the like regional expert on all of Quick Trip, I think. I think you know more about Quick Trip than anybody who has ever worked at Quick Trip.
Well, I had worked at Quick Trip.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
You forget, I was also a former employee back in the 1990s.
I think this is also important to note that this is Quick Trip QUIK, not the KWIK Quick Trip. Because there's 2 different Quick Trips.
Oh, there's only one Quick Trip.
They're
imposters, but there's a true Quick Trip. Similar to the Catholic Church.
That is true.
There's only one true Roman Catholic Church. The rest are pale imitators.
Yes.
So going back to this, so that guarantee from that Quick Trip employee was as valid as the guarantee I made that rants or sidetracks.
Especially because you immediately went on a rant. Yes. Your guarantee of no rants made you think of a rant to go on.
Correct. It was a guarantee.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah, and I can go on a different rant, but I will decline. So this chapter is called The Triumph of the Cross. So this is really the transition from persecuted church, a church persecuted by the Roman Empire, to being the official church of the Roman Empire with all its benefits and drawbacks. You say, well, how could it be a drawback to be the official church? Well, if you think about it, there's an inherent corruption in being a governmental agency for any religious or spiritual person or entity. We'll get to that.
Very true.
So, of course, we're talking about, for those that don't know and don't read and are stupid.
Insult the whole audience here. That's great.
Oh, no. Anybody who listens to this would know that it really officially started with the conversion of the Emperor Constantine, who really was a pagan throughout his entire life. And then I liked how they even mentioned, or the author mentioned, that he was not really officially baptized until he was on his deathbed, and even that was by a heretic, a heretical bishop. So I don't know the take. But what he did was make it certainly legal and an official church of the then became the Holy Roman Empire, I guess is what they really called it that early, but it became the Holy Roman Empire. And then, of course, this is the story of, he was going to go off to battle, and he saw like some sort of vision of the cross, and he's some sort of like sun worshiper anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I had forgotten that his mother was already a Christian prior to his conversion. So it's not as the author says, it's not as big of a surprise of this turnabout, because anyway, so there was a great discussion. It wasn't that long in the book about why there was this spread of the Christian faith, other than, the power of God or the hand of God, or, just the people really striving to get it, spread the word. But it goes into really the philosophy behind it, why it was powerful for the people at that time. And one of them was that there was a struggle with meaning within the Roman Empire at the time, because there were issues with the management and the administration of the empire for a while at that point, and their philosophy was so ingrained with citizenship and devotion to the state that if the state is dysfunctional, necessarily your spiritual life is dysfunctional, and so that causes a big problem. And you can see some, there's a lot of people in the last decade or even longer referencing the fall of the Roman Empire with regard to the American situation now. But you can kind of see some trends about this spiritual, like people are lost a little bit, and then the power and the philosophy of the pagans at the time was very pessimistic. And the Near Eastern religions was pessimistic, as the author reminds us. Even those that were spiritual were saying the world was ruled by demons, but Christianity had a different view, that there was a purpose to life, and there's a purposeful direction to life, and we are all valuable, even though we have original sin, we do bad things, we can be redeemed. And that is compelling at all times, especially if your prevailing religion is struggling with fate. Like they had a very fatalistic outlook, that the events of your life are preordained or predestined, and so it's a really sad belief to have, that you don't have any control over your life. And you're seeing a lot of the parallels in modern American society.
I think we've mentioned this before on the podcast, like for people who don't really, practice any religion, so many of them just get so wound up like in politics. And it's like that becomes like the sole focus. And then when politics and, the world, the United States and everything seems to be going downhill, it's like, well, everything just seems miserable. There's nothing else to look for. And I think that's exactly what they're seeing here in the Roman Empire. Of course, we don't have the same level of like state worship necessarily. But it's still that element of, if everything that I am is so tied into this, political structure, and the political structure starts to go downhill, that's going to have massive effects on like the way that these people see the world. Yeah.
And there's really, and paradoxically, I think that's the reason there's such a draw for guys like Andrew Tate. Because you reference like politics becoming a religion, but I think there's more people as in an actual raw number that are just disengaging, non-believers, and they're just kind of lost in life, and they're trying, especially men, I think, are trying to find meaning in life, and they're just not finding it in modern society, especially young men. Man, it's a tough world out there for the generation behind mine, because there's a very little belief in religion. The institutions of government and society are failing them. The promiscuity issues and all that kind of stuff. And when somebody like Andrew Tate says, hey, you should be you devote yourself to, improving your body and your mind and your career, and good things will come to you. I think that has some resonance with people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really overtly spiritual, but I think it's even more applicable to Jordan Peterson and his draw to both men and women, but he seems to have an audience that's predominantly men. But his views of self-sacrifice and struggle, and basically anything worth doing is difficult. I think there are a lot of parallels to modern American society with the society in Rome as described by the author, and as we know, because they really had this kind of fatalist philosophy, and the Christianity is an antidote to that, because you find meaning in these messages, and there's a description of different kind of schools of thought at the time. The Stoicism, which we kind of have a vague understanding of, somebody being stoic, which is somebody that quietly accepts difficult times. I think that's really kind of a more modern version of it. But this was actually a school of thought, as we studied in a previous chapter. But that philosophy at the time was also fatalistic. That you just didn't. It's a calm acceptance of your fate, and you just keep moving forward, and it's kind of a detached a devotion to duty. And it mentioned that Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic, really hated the Christians because they were so overtly passionate and fanatical in their belief. He just found them repulsive because he was more of a Stoic. And I don't know if you can interrupt me anytime. And,
I was just going to add, the idea that, both of these philosophies, what we're talking about here is Stoicism, the next with Epicureanism, which is just, whatever, makes you happy, essentially. Kind of ties back into his previous point, where it's like all of the prevailing philosophies at the time, taught that everything was inherently cyclical. The same bad things are going to happen, same, over and over again. All that matters is how you deal with them. Same thing, with the Epicureanism, it's just going to be a cycle. So just do whatever makes you happy right now. But then once you have sort of the story of Christianity, this history that leads up to something, you have a way to break that cycle and do something more. And I think, a lot of people, I think even today find that very compelling. I think if we do see people converting, to Christianity or to a religion, it's usually out of that desire to break out of just that cycle of doing the same things over and over again and just dealing with it.
Yeah. And I think there's a real missed opportunity in the Catholic Church right now, that they don't really have a compelling message. Trying to either bring people back into the church or new converts. But it's there. It's the thirst is there.
Well, I think it's also an issue of just, all of their messaging, at least in my experience, towards young people, having grown up Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, it just doesn't have the full effect that it could. I feel like when the church tries to market towards, teenagers and stuff like that, they try to make it as non intrusive as possible. They make it the simplest sort of version of everything, just to sort of entice the greatest amount of people. And that's just not the way we should be doing it. We should, because there is I think that desire for deeper meaning. And if one of the major institutions of that deeper meaning is just putting forth just sort of this general generic, be good, that's Christianity, Jesus loves you, that's not going to really attract very many people.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a belief system that brings meaning to life.
Yeah.
And I find nothing in let's not say nothing. I find only one aspect of the Catholic Church more revolting than youth ministers. And the things that I find more revolting are criminal in nature and abusive. I mean, I think youth ministers in the Catholic Church and the youth ministry programs are just so terrible and so obnoxious and so fake and so false. And when the mid-30s something hipster wannabe pulls out the acoustic guitar, I just want to go all Animal House on him and smash that guitar in the stairwell. Seen the movie, the reference. If I find my love, cherry has no stone. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you ever see
I've never seen Animal House. No. You've mentioned it many times on the podcast.
You can Google that scene.
All right.
Ludo smashing a guitar, and his little smirk at the end of it says it all, and it's brilliant comedy. Anyway, Did I tell you that I watched the last half of Old School with Eli the other day?
You did not tell me that.
That's one of my favorite movies, but it was the cable TV edited version. So in case everybody's armed, because it's a rated R movie, but it's anyway. So it was on one of those extra channels you get for free, and anyway, so that's it was kind of like the more modern version of Animal House. It's a very funny movie, and Old School is deeply profound. But I will talk about that some other time.
All right.
Maybe if our listener wants to know why Old School is deeply profound, I can share that any future episode. Anyway, talking about that Christian wisdom and profound thought. There's a reference to Justin Martyr, I guess. Martyr, yeah, Martyr.
Yes, the Martyr.
I don't know if I ever heard of him. Have I ever heard of him?
He
was a philosopher. He opened a school in Rome. This is the early years of the church, of course. And he referred to Jesus as the ultimate philosopher, which I think I was just saying that the last episode. I think he's underappreciated as just a brilliant philosopher. Whether you believe he's God or not. I mean, the philosophy itself and the belief system itself is just fantastic, and I don't know why it's not more universally adopted. Be more than it is. But in any event, then there's a point the author makes that the philosophy itself is not restricted any particular area of society. The rich, the poor, educated, the uneducated. It has a truth that everybody can accept and everybody is welcome to, and that is kind of unique. It certainly was unique at the time. So it wasn't just a religion of the powerful, and then everybody is following the lead of somebody else, or you're trying to assuage the angry God, all powerful God. It's a more of a personal relationship, and it appeals to everybody, that everybody as well. So that was unique as well. It also emphasizes free will, which we've kind of already talked about. It's a counterpoint to that fatalistic attitude or belief system at the time, and still exists today. People feel like they can't change things, or they can't. The forces of society, or they're victim of this or that. It's impossible to have that belief if you really are a devout Christian, because you've been given this gift.
True.
And once you believe that, it's like, well, once you really accept it, you can't be fatalistic. It's impossible to have both of those beliefs at the same time.
It's like, as soon as you acknowledge, I'm, essentially the master of my own actions, it's so hard to just get back into that idea of, well, everything just bad happens to me. There's nothing I can do about it. It always has to come from that recognition that no, there is always something I can do about it. I am in control of myself. I should, keep moving forward. I should move past these bad things, even if they are happening.
And I think it's almost like a mind virus that spreads in a good way, because the same philosophy applies to like my weight loss journey, which is a path, a straight path. It doesn't go up or down. Maybe it's like my weight loss journey is actually a slight incline in weight over time. But I can't. I mean, I can make those changes. Just not doing it.
Yeah.
For whatever reasons, laziness. If I have my own personal excuses each time I have a huge disgusting meal, or each time I don't go to the gym or work out or whatever. And that same fatalistic attitude that says you're a victim of everything, I think pervades your entire life. Once you buy into that fatalism, it's like, well, why bother? Everything's going to be the same. Exactly. Anyway, you went on to a lot of detail on Constantine's conversion. I don't know why, but there's several pages of it. We talked about it a little bit. That he converted. His mother was already a Christian. The symbolism of the unconquered sun, which was a dominant Roman cult, and then they had those same pagan symbols on their shields and their armaments.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting points, but which goes on to it a little bit. In imperfect conversion, because he didn't just like become a whole Christian. He essentially did what the Romans did, and their whole polytheistic society is like, well, if a new god should appear, or should if we conquer essentially like this city or something, and they have their own god, we can welcome them into the Roman pantheon. They can still sort of worship that god. That's essentially what he was doing with Jesus and the one God. So it's sort of this idea that he probably did not fully understand, or was unwilling to understand, like the monotheistic portion of it, and he just accepted Jesus as like another God that he could use within the Roman polytheistic system. Because as he said, he has either an image of the cross or the letters Chi and Rho, which he put like on his banner, along with, as you mentioned, the Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. So he just kind of combined the two. But it was at least a step forward away from just the pure polytheism.
Yeah, and the author goes on to really state that the main importance of the conversion was that there was toleration for Christianity. Now they weren't persecuted, but there was more. It became officially part of the empire. The edict the complete toleration was granted to Christianity, the Edict of Milan of 313. So that's the kind of date marker there. Okay, here we are. I think it was 310, 311. 311, I guess, was the battle and his conversion. And so then you're talking about 2 years later, you have a formal edict exempting the church from taxes and the clergy from military service, and appointed bishops to civil judges in their local communities. I mean, so you see there's kind of a structure being formed as part of the empire. But there's also a whole bunch of decrees that the author titles in this section a moral revolution. So establishing Sunday as a day of rest, abolishing crucifixion at all, forbidding branding of criminals on the face, since the face is the image of the soul, which is pretty. You really get an idea how brutal society was when you're forbidding the branding of criminals, but only on their face. So you're still branding them somewhere, depriving slave owners of the power of life and death over their slaves. So they're still owning the slaves. They still could do terrible things to them. They just don't have the sole power to kill them. Because I guess they don't like them anymore or whatever. And the usury is abolished, or at least condemned. She describes as excessive interest on loans, which is a modern definition of it. I wonder if that applies to all interest, because the Muslim religion, I think, is supposed to be against all interest on debt. And then, widespread freeing of some slaves and charitable works being extolled. So you see like this, those are all good things.
Those are. It's
like, and it would have been beneficial to the entire society that those changes made, not just to their souls, but practically. You'd think, these are all improvements everybody can get behind.
Yeah.
Except
I think
really, I guess the criminal branders union might have been upset.
True.
Maybe they charge more for a face branding. I don't know.
Well, I think going off of that's great. Going off of like the societal impact, I think even more importantly is what he mentions, like Christianity revitalized the Roman family as the basis of all social life, enjoining fidelity on both husband and wife. So making sure that the family unit is intact, and then of course which is a huge topic of discussion now, even still in the modern day. With single parent households and how that affects like children growing up, and so seeing that as sort of making sure that the family is intact to provide a social structure is probably one of the most impactful things if we're judging even by today's standards.
Yeah, and I have a lot of thoughts on modern day divorce law, but they're not fully formed yet.
Interesting.
I know that the system is just completely effed up. But I don't know that I have any sort of practical solution to any of it, other than people got to stop cheating on each other, for crying out loud.
That's a good solution.
That's the main problem. I mean, that doesn't solve all of them. I mean, there's still abusive people and just ignorant people, and abusive. I mean, both sexes. There are a lot more guys than people realize that are verbally and physically abused and are just beat down, and it's sad. It's sad. Of course, everybody is aware of domestic violence, which is predominantly men on women violence, but not exclusively. But it's predominantly being a majority of it. But in any event, but yeah, so there's a discussion of he made changes to divorce. It was, easy among the Roman society. They didn't have that type of they had, but kind of like a divorce at will, I guess, mainly for the men. And so there were some restrictions on divorce, or I think I'm trying to remember. I had highlighted somewhere, but I think a man could divorce a woman if she was unfaithful, but a woman could only divorce him if he like murdered somebody or something. It was like he could be unfaithful. So I'm trying to remember.
In Constantine's decrees, it was allowed to women for divorce only if their husbands committed murder or practiced magic, and to men magic only if their wives were unfaithful, sold their bodies, or induced abortions. So
yes, right. All good reasons for divorce, I guess.
Probably.
Yes. So anyway, so it does mention that, although, I like this quote, though a moral reformer, Constantine was also ruthless and cruel, even to the point of having wife and son murdered because of suspicion that they were plotting against him. So it didn't quite buy into the whole Jesus thing.
Not necessarily.
In a practical sense, but what do you do? You're going to plot against me? I'm going to kill you. Or I think you're going to plot against me.
The 11th commandment, actually. If you think someone's plotting against you, you can kill them.
That's the 12th commandment. The 11th commandment. The 11th commandment is from the great Saint Reagan. Do not speak ill of other Republicans.
Oh, there you go.
You never heard that?
I have heard that. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Anyway, so, well, Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1. You remember that scene when Moses?
I have never seen that.
Oh my God! Should I ruin it for you, or should you just Google it?
I'll watch it at some point.
All right, so I will not say what happens, but it's on YouTube, or any other your favorite video subscription services. Search Mel Brooks, Moses Commandments.
Okay,
and it is laugh out loud funny even today.
Oh, I think maybe I have seen that clip. Is he like walking down? He has like 3 tablets.
Yes.
I have the 15 and drops on 10 commandments. Yeah, I've seen that. That's very good.
I don't know why that's funny. Why is that funny? It just is. And then I always wonder, what are the other 5? Anyway. Church triumphant is the next section.
Yes.
So, they're talking about like mass conversions, it's really, really picking up steam after these legal changes. And so then the question is, are these people that are being converted, are they being converted because they really believe and they were, maybe they didn't convert before because they're afraid, or maybe they're doing kind of being coerced a little bit now, or are they doing it because it's a popular, thing to do? That was really impossible to know, but later, I think, in this section, a little bit later, it talks about how Augustine points out that even if the first generation of forced converts, even if the first generation of converts was coerced, their descendants might embrace the faith with sincerity.
That's true.
It's very, very practical advice from St. Augustine. Like, well, yeah, they might not take with this generation, but if everybody else grows up with it, then maybe they'll be more devout.
There you go.
So let's kill a few of them, and the rest will get the message. That's what forced conversion is.
Yeah,
it's you're converted or else. Well, there's got to be or else. Can't be or else. I'm going to say naughty. So then the moving of the capital to Constantinople,
yes,
which became Istanbul. Both of them became very good, a very good topic for a song by There Might Be Giants.
Maybe. I don't know who does that song.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, that
And so
song.
that gave the Pope, the religious authorities a little bit more freedom.
Hmm.
But eventually, it doesn't say this in the book yet, but because I'm sure we'll get to that, it ends up being a split or a schism.
Hmm. Schism,
Between
yeah.
the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Holy Roman Church. But the power had shifted from
Hmm.
Rome to the East. With the economy and everything like that.
Hmm.
So it gave the Pope independence, because then Rome really was the eternal city, meaning more of a religious sense than the Roman imperial sense.
Hmm. Very true.
So there's a discussion of Julian the Apostate, who was a successor emperor, and he tried to reinstate the old cults and
Hmm.
did bad things and such. And the pagan stuff survived for a time, but then it really ended. Was it Justinian
Hmm.
closing the school of philosophy at Athens, which was really the final sign of
Hmm.
Christianity's victory over these
Yeah.
pagan.
Yeah, so it really took a while, because that Justinian ruled from 527 to 565 AD, and so that's what, like 250 years since the Edict of Milan, 313. So it took about 250 years. The polytheism, the paganism was still very much around for a very large portion of early Christianity. Sort of in and around Rome and the Mediterranean.
Yeah, but I agree,
Hmm.
but it's also very fast to go
True,
from
true.
outlawed religion.
Hmm.
Were thrown to the beasts, for entertainment,
Hmm.
just what they believe, to being the official religion, and in fact, closing down the other schools of thought formally by the government. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a pretty seismic shift for a religion that only existed, well, at that point, it was 500 years, I guess. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a long time, but anyway, so yeah, I get your point that it wasn't just like the flipping of a switch.
Hmm.
It was a couple hundred years from the final nail in the coffin. Get those stupid philosophers out of that school. So yeah, then I already talked about the religious conversions and the forced conversions, and there's a discussion of baptizing large numbers of people, and there's Augustine again, making a reference to the wheat and the tares allegory. No, what do you call that?
Parable.
Parable. Thank you.
You're welcome.
From Jesus, allowing the wheat and the tares to grow side by side, and then they're going to be sorted out at harvest time, which is a very strong allusion to when we all die.
Yeah,
We go to heaven or hell.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter who's baptized now, just baptize everybody. And then if they don't really want the baptism, God will figure it out later, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's similar to the thought of kill them all, let God sort it out.
Yeah, generally. But it's the more optimistic, I guess, like the complete opposite, actually, I think. Baptize them all rather than kill them.
What is that a reference to? There's some sort of, is it a book or a movie?
I think I know what you're talking about. Here, I'll look it up while you're going on here.
There's a very brief snippet of the kernel of natural law being brought into philosophy, which is such an important concept that people don't even know what natural law is, which is there is a law beyond the laws that man make, that exists before and after and all time. That's how we're going to be judged. That is, by our very nature, there is a law that exists beyond our ability to alter it. That's a natural law, transcends any civil law, and that's really a foundation for freedom and justice and the American legal system, in my opinion.
Very
Anyways,
true.
so
I
there's
found the quote. Sorry to interrupt you. It is not a movie or a book. It is a real thing that a commander of the Albigensian Crusade said prior to the massacre at Béziers on the 22nd of July in the year 1209. So back in the 1200s during the Crusades, he said.
Was he a crusader, or was he was a crusader?
Yes, he was the commander of the crusade.
Okay.
Kill them all, let God sort them out.
It has a certain efficiency.
You're not wrong.
Well, there's, the people forget how brutal war was for the ancients. When you read some of these stories about these conflicts, these even small city states, the victor if they don't surrender, so they'll have terms of surrender. They come and they surround the city,
Mm-hmm.
and then people, they'll gather in the inside the city walls, and they say, well, you can surrender under these terms, and if they refuse, and you're able to breach the walls and conquer them, it's like all the military age men are murdered, slaughtered, and the women and children are sold off into slavery.
Yeah.
And what was it? What was the Peloponnesian War? I think they salted their fields so they could never grow food there again, and took the entire population. They either killed them or sold them into slavery. It's not like modern warfare, and at some point it's probably going to come back.
Yeah. Very brutal.
They're kind of working on it in Ukraine now. And people don't realize, well, if you're just supporting the freedom fighters, okay, well, to a point, and then there's going to be no freedom fighters left.
Sure.
What have you achieved? That's something to contemplate.
That is.
All right, so Christian state, I think we kind of already gone over there. The episcopal office. So this is like you're talking about. Okay, well, they're really starting to form up the bureaucracy, I guess you'd say. And so talking about how bishops are selected and elected, and there's a discussion. It was St. Ambrose. I'm trying to remember. I highlighted that he was a prefect of City Milan, and I think he was not even a candidate for for being a bishop. Yeah. He wasn't even a catechumen yet, but a child shouted out his name, and he was speedily acclaimed as the bishop of that town. And so he had to first receive baptism, and then he was ordained a deacon, priest, and bishop on successive days. All right.
Yeah.
So now you're officially the bishop. So maybe that was a good idea. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back, and I think there's more about this a little bit later. But it's so much of like the bishopric was at the time just like the actual like administrator of the local state, of the local area. And so it's like, well, why not just take the existing guy and make him into the bishop? He knows what he's doing. He's probably done a good job. That's probably, why his name was shouted out or something in Milan. And so they're like, well, let's just use this guy. Let's make him a bishop, and he can rule over us just like he used to. And I think that happened all over the place.
Yes. They're talking. Yeah, there's a discussion about like the prefect of the city, which is like the mayor. It was pretty important, but in the eyes of eternity and perhaps the eyes of history, the bishop may be more important, especially as a spiritual authority. And at the time, they believed that they were accountable for their flock. So if the last day of judgment arrived and all their people were sinners and not devout, they consider themselves accountable for their flocks. I wonder if there's any sentiment of that in today's modern church.
I hope not.
I certainly don't want to be accountable for them. But having said that, I'm sure they're great people. And so there's a discussion of, okay, what was the church doing? Pretty much a lot of the things that the church is doing, and it does do these things. The care of the needy, organizing charities, and the Catholic Charities is one of the most efficient charities in the United States. So that is a worthwhile organization. The last time I checked, which has been a few years, and of course those things can change. But I did like there was a reference to let's see, where was that? St. John Chrysostom.
St. John Chrysostom.
Chrysostom, the golden-tongued, excoriated the people of his city, especially the rich, for their injustices and their neglect of the needy. There's a parenthetical following that. He antagonized people by his bluntness and was soon deposed.
I think it's also important to note the reverse of that, which he mentions, Julian the Apostate, the one emperor who was like, no, we don't want the Christians anymore, even goaded his fellow pagans to imitate the Christians in their generosity. So it's like, even this guy who's like opposing, their entire philosophy is like, well, they're actually doing good work. Pagans, be more like them. Why can't you do the good things that these Christians are doing? So even for him, the guy who's sort of the symbol of the opposition to all the Christians at the time recognizes they're doing some excellent work.
True. Very good point.
Thank you.
I was interested in the next little section here, the ecumenical councils. That there's that even at that time, early on, they have regular meetings of the church leaders, and such as the Council of Jerusalem, and they're to deal with these issues. And really, in the fourth century, which would be like the 300s, there's a long series of councils where they're making these ecclesiastical judgments about, okay, how are we gonna do this? What do we really believe, and that sort of. And I think it seems like, if I'm not an expert on this, but they really seem to have established all the main principles of the Catholic Church probably by 400.
Yeah.
When you really get down to it, I mean, there's not a whole lot of debate over the fundamental precepts of the Catholic Church after that. I mean, the administration and this and that, of course, changes over time, but it seems like the main principles of the Catholic Church probably established by those councils at that point.
And so much of it stems from sort of that distinction between the old and the new, because that's really what a lot of the first councils were about, was like the necessity of like Jewish practices for new Christians. Is like, well, what parts do we keep? What parts don't we keep? And so it's sort of fleshing out that idea of, Jesus is sort of the fulfillment of the Old Testament. And so we don't need a lot of those Old Testament practices anymore. And we have this sort of new principles of our faith in Jesus. And so that's what you're saying. We're resetting the core principles of the faith really from very early on. A lot of that's just done in direct comparison to Judaism.
Yeah. Yep. So then moving on to like the division of the bureaucracy, I did not know that the word diocese was based upon Diocletian when he divided up the empire into local administrative use. I mean,
I did not know that either.
It's not like I was wondering where that word come from, but I was reading that, and that was kind of interesting. And then they're talking about how do you decide? They set up a process for investigating bishops accused of misconduct, with a final appeal to the see in Rome. They in the 4th century, the episcopal sees were gathered into provinces, which is under a metropolitan, later called an archbishop. So you see this structure being formed above, the individual parishes, which is the next description, which is, a geographic area, not just the little municipality, but a geographic area that is divided up as part of the administrative state of the church. And then the church finance, which is the good and the bad of being an official recognized church, is that they confiscated from pagan temples certain assets, gave it to the church to administer, and the idea of accumulating property for the church, well, then God allowed, the thought was God allowed that so the rich could help the needy, and we could all do God's work with the money, which is important. But there, of course, you end up with some, as the author calls it, luxury-loving prelates who flaunted wealth and power. And he mentions a George of Cappadocia, died in 361, the patriarch of Alexandria, who had been a dishonest merchant before being elected bishop. That seems to be foreboding. He was murdered after he systematically exploited the episcopal office for financial gain.
Yeah.
He probably should have just stayed a dishonest merchant, but he got spiritually greedy and became a bishop.
Well, the point that he makes there at the beginning of that paragraph, he says, the episcopal office now became desirable in worldly terms. And so that's what really gives the rise to these luxury-loving people. As soon as you make it a thing that would give you earthly power, you're going to attract the sort of people who just want that earthly power and don't really care about the spiritual aspect or the religious aspect. It's just, well, they're paying these guys a lot of money and they have a lot of control over these areas. Now I want to become a bishop. And it's not coming from that attitude of, I want to, serve the church and the people.
Yep. And then there's another little discussion about, which maybe when I should have brought this up, that all social classes were welcome into the church. And there's a reference to a professional wrestler called the Creeper, which I thought was kind of interesting. It sounds like a fun guy. But, the church is egalitarian. So, there's, a reference to a bishop forbidding his deacons to make room for aristocratic latecomers to church, to the Eucharist, but instead commanded them to find seats for the poor if they needed it. That's on page 63. So you can see this as, the administration and they're, a lot of them are trying to do good, so there's always going to be some outliers. there's a fascinating discussion of marriage and celibacy,
Mm-hmm.
which is certainly current today with our society and our church. But I was a little surprised that the Christian marriage ceremonies, the nuptial ceremonies, really were not as formalized
Mm-hmm.
until a couple hundred years into this. So,
Mm-hmm.
really says, essentially marriage remained a matter of civil law up till like maybe 400.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it would be like a blessing of a civil marriage at that point. And of course, that's one of the arguments about like gay marriage,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. It's really just a civil thing rather than a religious thing. And of course, we're going to see
Mm-hmm.
soon enough the push for more than two people in a marriage and other sorts of things that people aren't really contemplating too much now because it's a logical
Well,
result of the change.
the point about marriage not really being a very structured process is sort of still like upheld like in the actual sacrament of matrimony today, and that it's one of the sacraments where you don't need a priest or you don't need a bishop to like perform that sacrament. The people who perform it are the two people like marrying each other. They are the officiants of that sacrament. It's not the priest. It's their actions in that sacrament that makes the sacrament happen.
I think
You
you
look
got to.
confused.
I think you have to have a priest there.
Well, for the mass, yes, and he has like a ritual function, but the actual people who are performing the sacrament is not the priest. It is the two people. The priest does not factor into that. It is the man and the
Yes,
wife.
but I think it has to be in the form of a mass.
Yes, yes. So the priest does play a role in the mass itself, but in the actual sacrament is what I'm saying. Like the whole
the church will not recognize a marriage
Mhm.
unless a priest officiates.
True. But the sacrament itself is what I'm saying. Like the church teaching is that the I forget what the word for it is. I want to say officiant, or the person, the people who are bringing that sacrament into to existence or what have you, are the two people themselves, the man and the wife.
Agreed, and it is unique
Yes.
in that aspect.
Yes.
Yes, good point.
Thank you. Took a while to get there, but thank you.
Oh no, no, it's good. But I thought you were saying it more broadly than what you actually did.
No.
Yes. So there's a discussion of clerical celibacy, which I have to admit, I did not realize this was a discussion this early on in the church. I thought that the celibacy issue was more importantly raised after there was more later in the life of the church when there was more corruption and sexual problems, that kind of stuff with the marriages of the priests and deacons and stuff. So this is a difficult discussion to really come down on as far as the value of the clerical celibacy. St. Paul extolled celibacy. I think in most the author mentions in most clergy in the early centuries were probably married, but St. Paul really talked about how you should devote your life and be celibate and that kind of stuff. And of course, there's evaluation. I don't know if it comes in a little bit later about the value of virgins, female virgins and that kind of stuff as kind of a special class of people and that they had special value, et cetera, et cetera. And then there in the early in the church, and some, I don't know if it's universal, but the priests and it's mentioned the priests and deacons could not marry after ordination, and were required to be continent, as they say, on days when they celebrated the Eucharist. So, which I don't know if you saw, I thought it was really funny how we've kind of declined as a moral society. Was it yesterday or the day before? There's a representative, Nancy Mace, who attended the congressional prayer service. It's a big deal. I don't think it's not a Catholic thing, but I'm sure there are Catholics there. But I think it's like a non-denominational prayer breakfast. And she gets up to speak, and she says, "Well, let's see, how do I put it?" So she says, "Yeah, I was getting up and I woke up to come here, and my fiance, who she's living with, but she's essentially saying her fiance made the moves on her, but she said, no, I don't have time for that. I have to go to the prayer breakfast." and clearly alluding to premarital sex.
Yes.
Uh, and it was just so bizarre that, I mean, why? Maybe it was non-denominational, meaning non-Christian. But if it was a Christian, I think it might have been a Christian prayer breakfast. But even, I mean, well, there are some Christian groups that don't care, I guess, about that issue. But it just seems so gross. Like,
Yeah.
why would you? First of all,
Regardless of whether or not, like, why she would be doing those things, why would she bring it up at a prayer breakfast?
yes, well,
It's not a funny anecdote to bring up, like, at such a thing.
I think that's a funny anecdote to bring up to like a girls' night out. Like if you're all going bar hopping, I told my boyfriend we didn't have time. I'm not going to meet up with the girls and go to the bar. That probably appropriate in that context.
Yes.
But if anything professional, it just seemed weird. And so anyway, going back to the actual topic. So that's my second sidetrack rant of the day, but it goes to this discussion of, is there a value to celibacy? Is there a value to withholding that, I guess, from yourself and from others? And of course, there's a long discussion of it. And for anybody who doesn't know, the Catholic Church, they're supposed to be celibate. And I just thought it was kind of unusual. I did not know that for a period of time when they were allowed to marry, they just said, well, if you can marry as long as you're married before you're ordained. And I don't understand the logic of that. Yeah.
Well, that's still the case with deacons. I know that. I mean, they're not priests anymore, but deacons, if they married before they entered into holy orders, they can still, be married.
They can't be married after they're a deacon?
No, they can be married. They can still be married.
No, I mean, like, if you're a deacon first,
yes,
then you can be married later.
No, you can't marry again. But if you have a marriage before you become a deacon, that marriage stays.
Well, what I'm saying is that this is the quote: priests and deacons could still not marry after ordination. They were required to be continental. So that means if they were married before they were ordained, they're fine.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
If they're single and then they get ordained, they can never be married.
Yes. And that's the same rule that applies to deacons today.
Is that right?
Yes.
That's retarded. What's the difference?
I don't know. I don't really know.
What's the justification for that? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Are you sure that's the rule now?
That I am 100% certain that is the rule for deacons.
So if you're a single deacon, you're giving up marriage.
Yes. And I know it's a similar rule for, like, in some cases, if Anglican priests convert to Catholicism, and if they have a marriage, because the Anglican priests are allowed to marry, then they can keep that marriage and stuff like that. So it's very rare, but there are circumstances for that.
My dad had an Anglican parish priest, a convert, who was married and had kids.
Oh wow!
And have I never mentioned this to you? Yeah, he said when he went to confession to him, it was the best confession. Not that it's a good time, but he said, he says, Mark, I can actually talk to him man to man, and talk about the family and that kind of stuff, and he actually understands because he has a family, And he says it was different. It was better. And so my dad was always an advocate, certainly after that point, of allowing priests to be married, because there's really no reason not to. And why should only us non-priests have to suffer through it?
That sounds great, Dad.
All right, we got to start moving along. I'm running out of time. I got to get a flight to catch. So women in the church, they weren't in the church. So there was the only evidence, according to this author, and I'm not an expert on this, the only evidence according to the author that women may have exercised priestly responsibilities in the early church are the occasional denunciations of Gnostic practice. And there's some tomb inscriptions that commemorate the presbytera or an episcopa, which is the feminine form of the words for priest and bishop. But according to the author, they probably honored the wives of the male clergy, as opposed to them being bishops or priests. And again, I'm not an expert, but it's my understanding that the women did not have a leadership role in being priests, deacons, and bishops, which would make sense because in that era they were not generally did not hold those kind of, positions of authority in that society anyway.
Very true.
Anyway, so church buildings, he talks a long time about, how the cathedrals or the churches, it became to be what they are, which is a fascinating discussion. And he talks about Constantine turning over pagan temples into being churches. And then Constantinople had, he even talks to the Hagia Irini, which I'm mispronouncing, but the Hagia Sophia, the author describes as currently a museum.
Mm-hmm.
And so this book is a little dated because it is no longer a museum, it is a mosque.
Mm-hmm.
And so it had been made a mosque, and then it was a museum, and I think it went back to being a Christian church, but then it was a museum. Now it's an active mosque.
Yeah.
And so which reaffirms the next paragraph in the book, which talks about how early churches were built over old temples,
Mm-hmm.
as a kind of an exercise of power and a message that this is the true religion because we built this thing right over the pagan temple, and maybe they urinated on it before they put the our church on top of it or whatever. Just joking, but it's a similar reason why the Hagia Sophia became a mosque. Other than it's a huge big building and serves the purpose.
Yeah. What I thought was interesting, kind of moving on to that next section,
yes.
Where he says, the difference in design between the pagan temples and sort of the Christian churches. The pagans believed that the temples were like the houses of the gods,
Yes.
but the Christians viewed it as like the business of worship, essentially. So they're designed in the structure of like business buildings, essentially where official business would be had. And so God is sort of looking over the business of his people in their mission in the world, which I thought was interesting, a neat distinction.
True. Now, the next section, which talks about the liturgy
Mm-hmm.
of the Mass,
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily intend to go through the details of it, other than to note it's like the same that what we do now. I mean, it's like 100% the same with the entrance rite. Now, so we're not as elaborate on most masses, but the use of incense and singing and chanting to begin the entrance of the celebrant, or the priest and the deacon. It's the exact same at what we do now. The prayers begin in the name of the Father, which was the ancient Christian blessing that became of the formal preliminary to all public prayers. Same thing now, the Catholic Church. The readings, which the Psalms are sung, which we still sing those stupid Psalms. And then a reading, one from the Old Testament, the second one usually a letter from Paul, and then the third from the Gospels. Exactly what happens in our masses every week to this day, 1,600 years after, year 400.
Yep.
I mean, it's astounding that it has remained relatively unchanged, although we're in English and in a continent away, separated by a vast ocean, in 1,600 years, but it's essentially the same thing. And then the one thing that did certainly change was the orientation. We've talked about this before, where you mentioned how was it pre-Vatican, the Vatican II, I guess, the priest would face the altar with the congregation. Now the priest faces us because it's more of a theatrical performance.
So it seems like.
But that way back then, the congregation generally faced eastward towards the rising sun, which is symbol of the resurrection. Which it's almost a kind of a better idea maybe than the two that we're doing now. I don't know. There was a mention of liturgical dancing that was only found in heretical sects, which is good. There's no dancing. It was disapproved by Ambrose, Augustine, and others. So thank goodness. That would probably be a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, so if people started dancing in church, I would be very upset. Sometimes the offbeat clapping already makes me a little upset when like the people get really involved in the more modern songs. Not a fan of that.
There should be no modern songs. I agree. In favor of no singing, and there's a reference to that later. I'll get to it. So then there's the offertory and the ceremonial washing of hands of the priest. Same thing. The bread, using unleavened bread, same thing. Consecration, which is exactly the same as what we're doing today. I mean, it's pretty cool, actually. Communion and talking about having communion rails as early as the 4th century, and that was really common up until really Vatican II, because you used to go as a little kid. I still remember. I mean, I think I'm after Vatican II.
Yeah,
because that was like in the 60s or
70s. I think so. Yeah, 60s.
I was born in 70, but they still used to have those communion rails, and you see them in some really old churches. People would go up and kneel, and the priest would be in front of you giving the communion. And I remember as an altar boy having the little dish on a stick.
Yeah,
what thing was called, so we could catch any crumbs.
Yeah. We used those. Yeah, we used those at in high school when we had mass. The school had those. But I was also about to mention the National Shrine where I go to mass up here. They still have the communion rail, but they don't use it. Instead, all the priests come around the front of it, and then they're sort of scattered throughout the back of the church as well, because it's a huge, building to get all the people in and receive the Eucharist. But they have the rails; they just don't use them.
Yeah, we're planning on going to church.
Yes,
Sunday.
Good, you'll see it.
Looking forward to it. Then the dismissal, which is go you are sent, or as they say, go now and share the gospel, or what do they say? Go now in the peace of the Lord, or something. There's a couple standard ones.
Yes,
I should have those memorized.
Usually, like the mass is ended, go in peace.
There you go.
Yes,
that's good.
There you go.
I don't like. I am refusing to do one thing.
No, you're refusing to do a lot of things, but please continue with this one specific thing.
Never mind.
No, I want to hear it.
No, you don't. You don't.
No, I do.
All right. The where you say right before the communion starts getting distributed, and the new current thing is new, like for a couple of years, few years, where you say, Lord, I'm not worthy for you to be.
Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word and my soul shall be healed.
I'm not doing that.
Really?
No, because the old one is, Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you, to say the word and I shall be healed. I'm saying that. That's why I say every time, I'm not saying the stupid thing under my roof. All right. I'm not worthy for you to be in my roof. Okay, whatever. I mean, that has no meaning to me. I think it's put upon. I think it's forced. Because quite frankly, if a stranger comes to my door, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if he's coming in. There's a discussion of vestments. So the first few centuries, some probably didn't wear any distinctive vestments, but of course, that as it gets more and more elaborate, they certainly do. I kind of like that they have some sort of special outfit, separates them out as a representative and all that kind of stuff.
I do just want to point out the point about entering under the roof. That is a quote from the Bible. In the Gospel of Luke, the centurion who asked Jesus to heal his servant who is ill, the centurion says to Jesus, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word and my servant shall be healed. So
I know that. I know that.
Okay.
Why do I have to say what that guy said?
Because it's probably a reversal back to a more accurate translation, if I had to guess, because I'm guessing that's a very old prayer, and then we spit it in the Greek, and then we changed it into English.
Which one dude said that? Though, I mean, it's not like a prayer; it's a conversation. When they're saying the Hail Mary, I know we're repeating like Gabriel's words.
Yes,
related to the Bible. I get that, but I agree with that stuff, and it makes sense to me. But the other thing, it's like quoting a movie line. In my opinion, that was a brilliant thing for that dude to say at that time. It had meaning for that interaction. It doesn't have meaning for me, and it's forced. And I'm not doing it.
Fair enough.
So they can excommunicate me.
That's
it just seems, I don't know, because for maybe 50 years of my life, the other way was fine.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't like this. And with your spirit, that's the same change happened at the same time.
All right. Well, thank you for that little aside. Let's keep going with baptism, I think.
Yeah, well, you can baptize them by dunking them or pouring water over them.
All right. Thank you for that summary.
And up to modern times, there was issues with baptizing infants. People thought that if a child Because the original sin, if you didn't baptize a little baby and the baby died at 6 months, it's going to hell. And every once in a while, the old people that were taught that and believe that are all dying off, because it was like 2 generations older than me, probably. And so I doubt that priests still get that. Yeah. Like, you have to baptize a baby, because like especially when people were not having their children baptized because they weren't anymore, their parents or their grandparents were freaking the F out, because they're like, this baby's going to go to hell. They have to baptize a baby. And the priest is like, I can't baptize a baby unless the parents are wanting me to baptize them and they're going to raise them as Catholics. Like, they got to attest to that. Otherwise, it's not a baptism for a child. We could do it later. Well, baby, when the baby gets hit by a car and dies, it's going to hell. The priest says, no, that baby is innocent. The baby is going to heaven. How do you know? It's original sin. That's not the belief of the Catholic Church. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. Conversations have been related to me by multiple priests over the years that they've had these discussions, and they don't tell me who they're with, and they're not disclosing anything, but they say these discussions have happened.
I bet, yeah.
But that was a discussion way back when, beginning of the church. It's
very true. I
think we probably put that one to bed. Oh yeah, here's a reference to musical instruments are sometimes used in pagan worship to ward off demons. So first they were forbidden, which should have continued to this day. It would shorten the mass by at least 20%. And then there's Augustine, who I generally favor, had probably the worst thing anybody has ever said in the history of the Catholic Church. He who sings prays twice. That's such bullshit. That freak over the corner singing off key to lyrics they don't even really understand is not praying twice. They're not doing it. You're barely praying once.
Oh
just
my gosh.
Say it. Just say the words. Say them once. Why is there a chorus to your prayer? All right. Liturgical language. We can talk about that. I mean,
whoa! I like to talk about that. The languages are great.
All right, what do you want to say about the paragraph about liturgical language?
I just like to point out, church was predominantly Greek into the 3rd century, but then Latin was adopted because it was spoken language of the people, leaving the Kyrie as the last remnant of the old Greek liturgy. And a lot of Catholic churches, the Kyrie is still in Greek. The Lord have mercy. And they still do that up at the Newman Center up at Truman State. The deacon still sings that in Greek, which I think is really cool. And then nothing else is in Latin, but we still keep that one little Greek prayer, the Kyrie eleison, which I think is really cool.
Nice.
Yes.
Don't know how that goes. You gonna sing it for us?
And it goes Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, and then I don't know what the 3rd verse is off the top of my head. I'm just completely blanking. But it's the Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. That's okay. Yes. I wasn't even familiar with what you were talking about.
Yes. It's just one of the opening prayers. Yeah.
So you didn't quite pray twice, because you kind of sung it. 1.5. I give you 1.5.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Confessions was done differently back then. It wasn't a little confessional booth with a screen. It was public. And you had to wear like sackcloth, public penance, that sort of thing. They really obviously modified that. It's more streamlined and efficient and business-like now. So that there was public confessions are much more common in other denominations. You get up in front of everybody and you say, "Hey, I cheated on my wife. Lord, forgive me," or whatever. Yeah, I mean that's certainly a confession.
That is true. That's
If you're not sorry for it before you say it, you're sorry after.
That'll do it. That'll really do
it. So we talked a little bit about weddings. I don't think we can say that. There's a discussion of patron saints, how that kind of developed with the martyrs. They want to recognize the martyrs, and so you have these. What do you call those? The pieces of the body.
Relics.
Relics. Thank you. They even have the word circled. I couldn't find it. So that really caused a lot of people to do pilgrimages to see certain relics and pray over them, and of course the chief pilgrimage sites would have been Jerusalem, of course, and Rome, which is the church. headquarters, if you will. There's a discussion of church and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Art being in the church, and there's still a discussion to this day about statues and the statues in the church, and that's what a lot of people are shocked by if they haven't been to a Catholic church before. They see all these idols, idol worshiping, especially if there's like a side almost altar with Mary on it, which I completely understand how they're kind of like, whoa, that's kind of jarring. Especially with all the candles around it and a little kneeling thing there, or whatever you call it, banister, because it seems like you're worshiping a false god of Mary.
Yeah, we'll wait till you come up to the National Shrine. It is the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. So the way the church is laid out is like you have, the main altar in front, and you have like sort of a bigger seating area, and then the whole back of the church, along the outside of the pews, are those little alcoves. There's like 8 of them on the main floor, each one like a different style, but all venerating Mary. And then there's more in the basement and near the crypt church. It's really beautiful. But yeah, no, that's you're exactly right. That's what a lot of Protestants don't like about the Catholics, is they're like, well, you just sit and you pray to paintings and sculptures all day. No, we're not praying to those. We're using those in our prayers, to pray to God.
Yes. And there's a discussion of literature and architecture, and specifically literature. The poetry. The pagan poets. Can we have Christian poetry? And I think eventually the church said, yeah, it's fine. You could read poetry for its beauty. It doesn't mean that worshiping some other religious beliefs. And St. Augustine lamented that he had shed more tears over Virgil's Aeneid than over his own sins, which I think was kind of a funny quote. Pretty crazy cat, that Augustine.
It's a pretty cool dude.
Yeah, actually. And so architecture, which over the centuries, the beautiful architecture until modern times has been wonderful. Now modern times is just not. So we'll get back to
yes, I hope so. I hope we'll get a revival of the good old architecture.
Well, you're seeing a big push for that. I mean, of course, Tucker Carlson's a big proponent of architecture, and I think, well, it can't get any more brutalist than what it has been. And you see, and I see this in the municipal setting, a push to have better design control over your communities, and of course, it starts at more affluent areas, but especially like with signage. And utility poles and that sort of thing, and there's a sense that you have a better they of course they don't equate it with spiritual, but a better community, and of course you're talking about efficiencies, a better value, property values, etc., if you have more regulations with regard to the signage and design construction. So maybe all brick buildings. That's been going on for a little while, but I really see it's picking up a lot more steam, especially with public buildings. And that's even true with the huge cost increases that have come in the last couple of years with this runaway Biden, the Democrat inflation. But you're seeing a real push. If we're going to spend something, if we're going to build a public building that's supposed to be lasting the test of time, we're going to spend a little bit more money to make it more agreeable to beauty and to better architecture. And of course that I think architects are absolutely willing to make beautiful buildings. The problem was cost for a while.
I think it kind of goes back to that idea of like the search for meaning that we were talking about. If you're in a society where everything that's constructed is very much intentional, I think you're going to have just a much better outlook on life, right? But if everything's just exists to serve its most basic purpose, it's, whatever. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast earlier, but interning up here, there's 3 office buildings for the Senate. The one that I'm working in was built in 1908, and it's got that like sort of beautiful, like, neoclassical architecture with the white columns and everything. And the other 2 were built in like the 50s and the 80s. And so they're all like very clearly expensive buildings, like massive projects. But the newer ones are just really kind of ugly. Dirksen and Hart are the names of those buildings, and the design of the interior is they just have like big slabs of like stone that like sort of like are on the walls, and it's like this ugly sort of greenish color, which I guess might have been popular in the 50s and later in the 80s. But it's just, clearly we're spending all this money on these things and they just do not look as good. And it's just, why are we, if we're going to spend all this money on these fancy new office buildings, let's make them look good and make them have meaning. And of course, the newest one has this big, absurd, like abstract sculpture in the middle of it, which is just really ugly.
Yes. And the abstract public works of art are just absurd to me. If you want to have that in your front yard or your garden, knock yourself out. But to have abstract art as public art, I think is absurd. It just because abstract, by its definition, doesn't have any apparent meaning. It doesn't have any direct, concrete meaning to the mass of people who are paying for it and viewing it. But anyway, I don't want to go too much on that rant.
Yes.
But the Tucker Carlson was a recent interview with God, it might have even been with Tate, Andrew Tate. I'm trying to remember if it was him or somebody else, but you were mentioning architecture, and it might have been somebody else. But anyway, but Tucker said, he went to this like little old, maybe New England town hall that was built over 100 years ago, and he says it was just beautiful, and he says, I remember thinking that whoever built this and designed and built this really loved the community. And expressed the love of the community through the design and building it. And modern buildings express like a disdain or hatred of the populace. And I think there's a lot to that.
I think so, yeah.
But anyways, moving along. Sorry to go off that tangent. So there's a discussion of the calendar. I am not going to go through all this stuff, other than it's very, very similar to what we have now, which they adopted the Roman calendar. And, of course, there's Advent, there's Christmas, there's Epiphany. Annunciation, this would be the Catholic calendar, Lent, Easter, all those things are, pretty much the same as what we have now, right? I mean, I didn't see any big differences.
No, not really.
Early church stuff. Then there's a longer discussion about the start of monasticism, starting with these pagan hermits, which I always think it's ironic how these hermits started getting together into monasteries. Like, wait a second, you're supposed to be alone in the woods.
Yeah, what I didn't realize is that the word monk is related to the mono, meaning one. So it originally kind of, to kind of summarize what he's going to talk about here is, they became monks to escape from the world. They went out to live in the desert or whatever, and, to engage in that sort of suffering and stuff like that, to deprive of them of like worldly pleasures. And then that sort of turned into later, sort of rules on how to be a monk, and then communities in which you could be a monk and still like serve the community. And so that's where we get the modern idea of like a group of guys living together in one house. So clearly not alone, not one, but like an actual just separate community from everything, which I think is just an incredible shift in the word.
Yes. And like I said, kind of ironic, usually there's some guy out in the woods or in the desert or something. But that the monasteries, of course, in large part saved Western civilization by a repository of knowledge and books and information and libraries and all that stuff. The author calls it a paradox. Monasticism manifested itself quite early in that they became famous for their holiness. Monks like Simeon Stylites, I don't know, attracted crowds of people who wanted to hear their teaching. So that like they're trying to separate themselves out, but because they're considered more what do you call it, holy, I guess, or spiritual, people gather to hear them speak. So it's kind of a paradox. That
I think even more important there to mention about Saint Simeon, it wasn't just that they wanted to hear him speak, it was because he lived for 37 years on top of a pillar getting life's necessities from a basket that he lowered down on a rope and then pulled back up to him, which is insane.
It's very theatrical. It's a good shtick.
Yeah.
And then he does mention, like where they're trying to be more stoic or keeping themselves from doing certain things. And he mentions that they're becoming ostentatious and pointlessly difficult, and that some were driven insane by their solitary life.
It's like, I can suffer more than you, which is like the exact opposite of the point of being a monk, which is to get away from like the earthly competition and desires. But you're doing it now to prove that you're better than everybody else, which is ridiculous, of course.
And there's the wandering holy men, they were, hey, I'm going from town to town, and Paul did, St. Paul.
That's great.
Augustine scorned those he called long-haired frauds who exploited popular credulity. And all I can think of is St. Augustine, like walking through San Francisco and yelling at the hippies. You long-haired frauds. Anyway, I thought that was funny. But then we already talked about, if you're in a monastery, you have to have obedience to your abbot, the head of the monastery, and I think was it Saint Basil that really kind of created more of a systemic monastery, I think, right? Combined asceticism. I always mispronounce that. With engagement in social and cultural activity. A lot of these monks could brew great beer. I think one of the things they could do, got into certain industries that they could end up doing a lot of charitable work too, but then we're going to see, I'm sure in later chapters, more of a commercial enterprise than a spiritual one. What else you want to say? Anything about these other ones?
I think just one note. I don't think it was Saint Basil who sort of set out the rules. That was this guy called Pachomius who wrote like a book called The Rule, which was, how these monks should come together, listen to the abbot and things like that. And then again, these other guys, Saint Cassian, who founded a monastery at Marseilles, according to the rule. But he says, ascetical practices were of no value unless they led to love of God and neighbor, and warned against extreme fasting as being as bad as gluttony, which is interesting. It's if you take it in the opposite direction to sort of prove that you're better than people, then you're just committing that same sin. But another point on the beer that you mentioned, there's an interesting story about a group of monks. I think it was like during the Middle Ages, but they fasted throughout the entirety of Lent by drinking only beer. Like they had brewed like some certain substance essentially that had like all of the calories and nutrients that they needed to survive for the entirety of Lent, which I think is pretty incredible.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like Guinness beer is got a ton of calories in it. You have those thicker stouts, and that's part of the benefit of brewing beer is that you're getting out the impurities and the biological contaminants through that process. True. You're not gonna get as many illnesses or infections and with contaminated water because you're brewing all that stuff out through that process with what yeast and whatever. So it's better. It was better back then to drink beer than it was to drink water.
Yeah,
because the water can be contaminated.
Very
bacteria
true.
or the little stuff living there.
Yes.
Gross.
All right. Do you have any other closing thoughts for this chapter, or should you get going and getting ready to go to the airport?
I liked it. It's growing on me. Yeah.
Good.
Book. Yeah.
Good. No, interesting stuff. I don't really read a lot about Constantine, sort of that era of the Catholic Church. Again, so the early church history is not my forte, but it's really interesting to see that shift there over, like you said, sort of a really brief period of time in the span of changing the entire philosophy of a people. And that's exactly what happened. So it's very impressive, very, very interesting stuff covered in this chapter.
Yeah, the two things. One, how it spread like wildfire and took over the Roman Empire essentially and co-opted it, and that the belief system is essentially unchanged from that time.
Yeah, well, that's another point that I think we should have mentioned when we were talking in the book there. He makes a point to say that they sort of adopted a lot of the pagan symbols, along with like a lot of the pagan structures, because the early Christians believed that, there's no more meaning in those things. We've sort of robbed them of their meaning. We can now co-opt the symbolism to actually have some meaning. And that's a lot of the criticism you see now from like people who say, well, Christianity just is, based on paganism, there's all these pagan roots. Well, no, not really. They took some of the pagan symbols and they incorporated them into Christianity because they recognized that those pagan symbols did not have those same pagan meanings anymore. And they just made them as part of Christianity.
Good point.
Yes.
No dressing. It just makes it pretty.
Exactly. Yes. All right.
Would you rather have a beautiful evergreen Christmas tree, or do you want like a dirty straw covered manger scene?
I'd rather have a big aluminum pole.
I have that over here. The
Festivus pole?
Yeah, it's in this room. You made
true.
a Festivus pole a few years ago.
That is true.
Bring it out every year.
That's great. All right. Well, this has been season 6, episode 4 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
All right. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. Again, that's ULMTD Opinions for updates on the next episodes.